Welcome. I'm Nick Gordon, an editor for Asia at Fortune, based out of Hong Kong. Thank you all for being here today. This is the first of two virtual events as part of Brainstorm AI, with Accenture as our founding partner. A special thanks to Scott Wilkie, Accenture's global lead for emerging technology security. Also on today's panel, Maria Milosavljevic, Group Chief Information Security Officer at ANZ Banking Group, Calvin Ng, Director of Cybersecurity Program Center at Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, and Jennnifer Tiang, Regional Head of Cyber Practice of Asia at Willis Towers Watson. We've got a fantastic panel here for today's conversation. Please feel free to use the chat as well to offer your thoughts, comments, and questions. Please use the Q&A function if you have a question, and please direct your question to one of our speakers. And I'd like to remind our audience that this session is on the record and may be reported by a Fortune reporter. So I wanted to start off this conversation with the now infamous cybersecurity attack earlier this year, where a Hong Kong-based finance worker was duped into losing 200 million Hong Kong dollars by a very believable deepfake of his company's CFO. You know, it's a novel AI spin on a tried and true phishing scam. But to start things off, I wanted to ask our panel, and maybe Scott, you can begin, how is AI really affecting the ways that cyber criminals are targeting companies? Is it a matter of old tactics being done faster and at greater scale, or are there novel attacks that we're now seeing thanks to generative AI?
Thanks, Nick. Great question to start with. And can I say that it's an absolute pleasure to be here as part of the Brainstorm AI program. What we're seeing at this point in time is certainly a widening in the breadth and volume of attacks across the board. In the last 12 months, when we've engaged with our clients en masse, we're seeing roughly a doubling in the number of quantum of ransomware attacks. And in fact, phishing attacks have risen by over 1,000% in the research that we've done. During that process, what we're seeing from generative AI and new large language models, they're enabling certainly more sophisticated attacks, greater volume, a lot better nuance and context about people, the ability to generate new contextualized based phishing attacks has certainly improved from the attack perspective. We're not seeing anything particularly novel, but as I said, certainly that volume and that sophistication and the specificity of the attacks are certainly rewarding the attackers and those who wish to do harm. With regards to deepfakes, it's certainly we're aware that there was this pending tidal wave. We've talked about it for almost 10 years now about the implications for deepfakes. However, very typically in enterprise, we're aware of them, but a lot of people don't do things until they're actually in there attacking that risk surface. So certainly the sophistication of deepfakes, the ability to generate them with relatively few resources is incredibly problematic across the board. One thing I can say though, Nick, is that old-fashioned concepts about good cyber hygiene, and number two, around having very dedicated and continuous training and awareness programs is absolutely essential. I know even in-house at Accenture, we're a company of 750,000 people ourselves. We have continuous engagement with the internal security team to teach not only the workforce, but our leadership team, our board, to continuously engage them in programs around phishing and deepfakes. The other thing that we're doing is some of my colleagues like scaring the living daylights out of each other and preparing deepfakes under certain scenarios to see if they can tempt or confuse each other. So I think that continuous training and awareness, continuous validation, continuous testing remains paramount even in this new world of large language models and very rapidly developing multimodal models.
To keep on this idea of scaring people, I want to bring in Maria. From your position and working in the financial sector, what are some of the potential attacks or the novel attacks using generative AI that keep you up at night, that you are most concerned about, as a major bank?
Sure. I think the sorts of things that keep me awake at night are probably the same things that are keeping many other people awake at night. And I think, to the points that Scott made, there's a few different things to think about here. The first one is that there is, Gen AI, I mean, AI more broadly, but Gen AI specifically is fueling the potential for large-scale misinformation. And so things like deepfakes are just an example of that, but so could undermining trust in in democracy around elections, etc. That's another area where we could see, and we have seen, a lot of risk. Similarly to that, phishing, especially very personalized, targeted phishing, is another example of some social engineering where, potentially misinformation can be used or generated as a result. But in the end, I think I like to think about it in terms of different categories. So there's offensive AI, which is basically AI being used in order to attack. And so these are all examples of that sort of things. Unfortunately, AI, which is incredibly useful and powerful, is available to both our friends and our foes. And so increasingly, we do see threat actors using AI in order to automate and really power their offense. And so without an AI-powered defense, we really can't sort of stay in that game. We will be outmatched. So there's offensive AI or attacks using AI, but then the flip side of that is that AI itself has risks. And so there's also adversarial AI, where an adversary would attack AI. So we've also got to be really mindful that, whenever we use AI, we're actually opening up potentially new vulnerabilities for threat actors to use.
I'd like to bring in Jennnifer now. How much damage can a cyber attack do to a company? And, if cyber attack happens, how might you at WTW actually evaluate the cost of that damage?
Yeah, I mean, so as a risk and broking firm, we're viewing cybersecurity risks, which is a huge umbrella term, but we're looking at it as the financial impact that's going to cause the company. And the scale of financial impact is huge. Just as Scott and Maria were mentioning, the sophistication and severity of the attack has just accelerated with, the likes of AI and under that Gen AI. So we look at things through lenses of frequency and severity, and on both axes, unfortunately, those have escalated with the advancements in technology. So how big it could hit your company, various factors involve that, your geographic footprint, your revenue models, if you're a manufacturer, the number of plants you're operating. But if you think about what your maximum possible loss could be, what is really going to cripple you, that takes a really kind of methodic approach to assessing, what is our revenue stream, have we done the business continuity planning, and yeah, that involves data analytics, which we use to help our clients assess that.
And maybe to kind of wrap up this topic quickly, Calvin, when you talk with companies, what are the sorts of things that they are most worried about? And is that the same thing as what you are most worried about when it comes to cybersecurity and AI?
Yeah. From the government perspective of Singapore government, AI indeed is coming in very fiercely. Everybody is trying to widely think of initiatives to adopt. That's good in terms of productivity, but AI also is actually nightmare, like what just now Jennnifer had mentioned. The frequency and severity have increases because of AI. Why is it so? You can easily craft a phishing email. You can easily automate a malware. You don't need to be a cybersecurity professional. You're able to craft a malware using a ChatGPT and do it so simply. And you're able to deploy ransomware as a service so easily. So things are being simplified. Doing evil things is simplified today. And that's going out like crazy, whereby a lot of people are just taking the opportunity to seize this sort of tools in the market to attack. So this is a very worrying part of AI. People are embracing AI for the wrong reasons and taking AI to simplify things for attackers to actually go in, penetrate into systems like that. So that's the key part of the AI that from a government perspective, we are worried. That's where actually we think that we work with industry and try to come up with initiative. How do we bring up this level of hygiene awareness, and how do you practice safe AI when deploying such system? Which probably I can elaborate further.
This is actually a good segue to kind of return to Scott here, because you mentioned cybersecurity training, improving levels of digital hygiene amongst companies, I think particularly amongst employees. I'm going to phrase this question frankly, which is, how do you defend against people using generative AI in unsecure and, let's say, dumb ways? How do you protect against that?
Nick, thank you for singling me out for that question. I'll try not to read anything into it. So Maria mentioned previously, very traditional approach to security or information assurance revolves around a governance, protect, defend approach. So when I look at that, I really have two types of engagement with our clients around the world at the moment. For those that are in highly regulated industries that are very, very risk aware, such as financial services or public sector, I have a slightly different engagement model now with the C-suite and the board of directors, rather than necessarily coming just via the CISO. And the rationale for that, Nick, is that in those highly regulated industries, boards of directors are thoroughly aware of their obligations around culture and risk and other things. And so are really setting the core principles for their organization of how they want to achieve the future. And the governance of AI and security and technology are very clearly delineated according to those broader principles. From our foundational perspective, on the other hand, there are clients that I meet from time to time who try to move straight to a use program of AI without fully thinking through the governance and a number of other things. And in that case, I'm sure it wouldn't be surprised to the listeners today that sometimes that doesn't go too well, where proof of concepts without well-defined guardrails and governance identify information that would mortify a C-suite or board of directors. And in that case, the goal is then to use that terror that comes from identifying that well, so that there is a more proactive approach. So I guess it's a long-winded answer of saying the nice thing is that generative AI is taking risk and security even more in an even more accelerated fashion towards the board of directors, so that both the governance and then putting in the guardrails, identifying some key principles such as least privilege and segmentation of risks and other things. Some of these core principles of zero trust are now being embedded in generative AI programs. No doubt the last thing I'll have to say to that is that at the core of all of this is data and information. So some really old-fashioned concepts such as securing data at rest, in transit and in use, this is a really good set of concepts to apply. So I think what we're doing is that we're seeing new models of engagement, new risks identifying, but some very old-fashioned concepts that go to the core of good security hygiene becoming even more important today moving forward.
Nick, can I add a little bit more to that? I think that was a fantastic answer from Scott. Ultimately, what we're talking about is trading in trust. Sorry, my light's going off. Trading in trust, right? So organisations like ANZ, a large global financial institution, our purpose is to shape a world where communities and people thrive. So we take it really seriously to make sure that security as one part of this is done well, but it's a much bigger story. And Scott's really, I think, put it really nicely. In the end, what we're talking about is trustworthiness in the way that we use AI or Gen AI specifically. And trustworthiness has a lot of different pillars that contribute to it. And some of those will build trust, like rolling out new features. and some of those things will degrade trust. So poor design, poor quality, poor security, privacy failures, fairness, you name it. There's a whole range of them. And so we've got to make sure that we balance that. But equally, you sort of said, how do we stop people from doing silly things? Well, innovation can come from anywhere. And I think it's also really important that we identify good ideas and capture them, because not innovating is also a risk. Because if we innovate, that can also build trust. Not innovating can be a risk, and it can lose trust. So we've just got to constantly keep our eyes on, what are we actually doing to make sure that we continue to serve our purpose.
And Maria, how are you at ANZ trying to find that balance between encouraging innovation, finding those features that build trust, while also warding off those developments that would degrade trust? How are you at ANZ trying to navigate that balance?
Yeah, well, one of the most important things that we're doing is we're bringing together all the various people in the puzzle, because there's lots of, as I said, there's lots of these different pillars, and they all can degrade or build trust. And so making sure that everyone who is involved is together in doing this, but then also making sure that we break down the silos, and there is a pathway to actually building out AI. So our CTO, for example, he does a lot of work to promote the use of AI, and we've got a way where anyone can put forward ideas. Those ideas can be assessed in terms of their value and their practicality. And then if it's green lit, then we've got a pathway for experimentation before we then industrialize. And so that pathway around experimentation is, if you like, a safe way for us to understand what we're talking about. You don't always understand what the risks are when you embark on a journey like this. You actually need to go, take a few steps forward, see what happens, understand the risk, do it in a contained way, to make sure that you don't roll it out to an entire organization or all your customers straight away, but really that whole experiment, fail fast, quickly.
Keeping on this risk point, to go back to Jennnifer, when you're talking to other companies, again, are you seeing a difference between what companies think they're worried about when it comes to cybersecurity and what you think they should be worried about? Is there a gap in kind of understanding cybersecurity risk between you and the companies you're often talking to?
I would say the level of understanding and awareness does range in spectrum based on the company size and obviously industry. So like the financial institutions industry, they'd be front runners in their awareness of cybersecurity. They're heavily regulated. So it was really great to hear about how, Maria, that you balance that drive to be innovative while also being, in a controlled environment, because, a lot of eyes, including the regulators, are on banks and finance institutions because they are such a strong pillar and basically, like infrastructure of society. So it does range in spectrum of awareness, but we have seen a huge scaling up of awareness. And I think, just even reaching board vernacular, like ransomware has reached board vernacular, and Gen AI and cybersecurity, these are all terms that boards are now more familiar with, and conceptually they get it, and they get that it's not just something that's fixed, like, oh, our IT team are on it. They understand that it's a spectrum of risk. I think they are seeing cybersecurity more through a risk management lens. So, you accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. I think perhaps before, avoiding is not possible. To be a 21st century operating company, you can't avoid that cyber risks. You have to be connected digitally. Mitigation, there's been a huge ramp up in investments, and thankfully we've got industry experts to guide us through. Scott at Accenture, he's guiding on emerging technologies, so holding the hands of companies that need stewardship through these times. And then more and more there is that understanding of risk transfer. So they understand we can't possibly meet and treat every single risk. So there is an element of insurable loss, and that they transfer that to the insurance market. So yeah, the level of understanding is improving.
I do want to get into this topic of kind of mitigation, how you deal with the damage caused by a cyber attack after it's happened. But I do want to bring in Calvin first. You know, can companies kind of help set best practices on cybersecurity for others in the industry? You know, so it's not just the government telling what they have to do, but can companies play a leading role here too, perhaps to their customers, to their clients, or to their suppliers? Before in our previous prep call, we talked about kind of supply chains and how that might be an avenue for cybersecurity training and sharing best practices.
Yes, I think when we want to deploy AI, we need to deploy AI in a secure way. We must think further than just developing a system from a design perspective to deployment, to even operationalize it to your staff, your client, or even to your third-party suppliers that's coming in. And in the end, you even have to think of how do you actually take away the system and make sure the system are cleaned up before end of life of the system. So there's a whole full spectrum of thinking over here. It's not just trying to quickly implement something and get a usage from AI, but actually it's how to use it securely throughout the life cycle of the process. So what we are talking about here is that I think we have heard a lot from the design and development cycle. There is actually of the board need to understand when they're deploying such system, what's the kind of risk and limitation, and what's the consequences of deploying an AI that can actually crawl information all over and produce information freely without consulting somebody. That's where Scott talked about guardrail have to put in place. So during the development cycle, you have to think about all these consequences and put in technical things like guardrail, even prevent data poisoning, whereby people may influence your data, or even model poisoning. These are some of the, and even the access control. Who should have the access control to understand and query what sort of information? So there's a lot of talk even from prompt engineering. You can get a lot of information out inconsequently. Yeah. So there's some of the confidentiality may leak out from that space. And sometimes there's an unintentional misuse of all this information also. So at the end of it, even at the disposal and from the third-party supply chain issue, we need to understand how does even free models or even models that supply, is there vulnerability? Is there an opening over there that actually there's consequences caused by this cybersecurity practice? So we need to look at it holistically in terms of the full spectrum. And at the end of it, when you dispose and you thought your information has been disposed, is it really disposed properly, Yeah. Or even when you train some model and you thought that after training this model, you can keep your data properly, but actually your model have learned some parts of the data. So these are some of the things that in the embedded model design that you need to understand what sort of risk you are going to and do a proper threat risk assessment of it. And manage this risk at the organization level, because sometimes this kind of risk is not just a technical risk. It's actually there's organization impact, reputational impact. It can be the whole company can. I talked to a whole company that it can be down because their design is out there in clear, and how that's the secret piece of the whole company design. So things like that have to think through what is the consequences at the highest level of the board, understanding the consequences of deploying an AI model, what are the risks and limitations there. Yeah.
Scott, you have something you want to add on to this point?
Yeah, Nick, every now and then I hear words come out of my mouth and I think, oh my goodness, I sound cliched saying it, but listening to Calvin speak just then, I'm reminded that, we've always had an adage that cybersecurity should be a team sport or is a team sport. Now, I do remember times when it certainly wasn't a team sport, no matter what anyone pretended to be doing. But certainly the last 5 years, I have never seen a time where collaboration has been greater or better intentioned. I read a ransomware agreement between 27 nations a couple of months ago. Now, the thought that 27 nations would agree upon anything is historically never very easy, but now I almost always see Singapore, Australia, Japan, the USA, Canada. I see this wonderful collective of people thinking about a laws-based or a rules-based world where people can be secure in cyberspace. And the terminology that we've all been using around AI, safe, secure, and responsible, I'm seeing very much that people are trying to live up to that paradigm and to engage collaboratively. And I'm not only seeing it at Kelvin's level, at a national security or cyber agency level, I'm also seeing it at an industry level. So for me, working in innovation and new technologies, the most dynamic places I think that I've been in the last 12 months have tended to revolve around things like financial services ISACs, whereby the level of innovation, thinking through as a community the issues around generative AI, around quantum security, around new worlds of insider risk management. These are really very innovative communities that are starting to build. And I think we're getting the benefit out of the diversity of the backgrounds and the diversity of thinking and the diversity of the way people invest and prioritize. I think this new world that I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is compelling and hopefully becomes very rich for everyone.
Can I just add a little bit more to that, Nick?
Yes.
I think that's been a really useful conversation. And obviously, as a global bank, we are in a heavily regulated industry. And I think it's really important to remember why regulation exists. A lot of people sort of don't necessarily understand the breadth of how regulation can operate. In the end, regulation is anything that government does to influence behaviour, which has a benefit in society, the economy, national security, etc. And so if you sort of think about it from that broad perspective, there is absolutely an economic imperative to using AI, because we want that economy to be strengthened and built, and no country wants to be left behind. But there's also an economic risk to insecure AI or poorly executed AI. And so regulators have to balance this and really make sure that they drive innovation effectively, but then ensure that the right guardrails are in place. And I think that for the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, many individuals can all work together with government to make sure that when we do regulation, we are doing it in a way where we are going to achieve both the imperative as well as manage and mitigate those risks. As I said, no country wants to be left behind, but at the same time, regulators or the government needs to be focused on those national opportunities as well as the individual risks to particular citizens. It's not straightforward. It's not easy.
Mm.
Yeah, I do agree with Maria. The point is that actually right now is really a team sport. It's only through these few years you can notice that actually not only government, regulator, last time enterprise will say, hey, regulator, you make some rules that you don't actually cascade down and we have a hard time on it. But you see this game is everybody is in it. From the regulator, government, everybody looking at the interest, everybody know that this is how useful. But how do we play a part individually to actually secure the use of AI? Right from the top, right from the manufacturer, and the people who use it responsibly. So these are some of the thinking that we're going to shift the landscape and shift the mind of the people. And I'm very happy that actually on the ground, this is happening in the whole world. And we have so many conversations around with UK, US, Australia, even South Korea, about all these that we want to do things together. We want to innovate together, but innovate it securely. Yeah. And everybody know the potential. Thanks.
So I want to remind our audience, we are open to questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A function, little box on your Zoom. While we kind of wait for some questions to come in, I do want to ask Jennnifer, and you mentioned before, the need to kind of mitigate the damage of cyber attack, to kind of understand the insurable loss that might happen from a cyber attack. Say the worst happens, cyber attack happens. What should a company do to mitigate that damage?
Well, ahead of that attack happening, I think the best way you can really mitigate the fallout, the financial fallout, is preparedness. And so Scott touched on it earlier. I think it was, really getting down, bidding in basics. And And part of that basic preparedness is making sure that you have simulated what an event might look like, that you've got cross-division awareness of business continuity plans, incident response plans, that this incident response plan isn't concentrated and only known at the IT level. So that there are various other stakeholders into a security issue. So there's legal ramifications, even, corporate communications, HR potentially. And so possibly it's even making sure that those divisions that might not be aware that they are a stakeholder in a cyber security threat, that they're aware that they have a part to play. And so the best way is preparedness, like anything. And so you'll have many external consultants that can assist with tabletop simulations. I've seen a real trend in the last few years with our clients that are running these tabletop simulations, and that it's getting the board understanding what the ramifications could be. So having conversations, being aware of a playbook and saying, oh, is this playbook up to date? Do our incident response plans even factor in our activation of our cyber insurance policy? Do people know whose role and responsibility is to contact external vendors? So that is going to be the best way to mitigate the financial fallout and make sure that if the worst were to occur, it's not, a round of headless chickens running around trying to, in a panic mode. People are aware of their roles and responsibilities.
So we have a couple audience questions now. I'm going to pose this first question to Maria, who's already answered this question in the Q&A box, but to pose this question out loud. So say your engineering team approaches you and says, we want to use generative AI to accelerate code development. How would you deal with that kind of request? How would you think about that kind of request in terms of ANZ's operations? And then how would you test their products test what is produced to make sure that it's safe and secure?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd be saying, fantastic, let's see what we can do with this, because as I said before, not innovating can also degrade trust, right? And so we do need to be really open to how innovation can make us better and stronger and faster. So in terms of how we would approach that, as I said in the answer there's two things. First thing is that we need to test things the way we always have. Make sure that we use the same kinds of techniques, because it's just code in the end. The way that it was created is irrelevant. We still need to test it in the same way. But secondly, a lot of organisations, including ourselves, are exploring the use of Gen AI for automating or doing the testing itself faster, more scalably. Because I think one of the biggest risks of all of this created new code is keeping up with the pace. And so we've got to make sure that we can do that from a security perspective as well.
We have another question from the audience that talks about, a lot of speakers have talked about countries and groups and governments coming together to work together on cybersecurity. However, and I think we do need to admit that there's geopolitics at play here. Countries have different views on national security in terms of AI. And so the question is, how do we best nurture technological growth, but also balance the geopolitical aspect of this? I might pose this question to Scott first, and then, but I think maybe others on the panel, like Calvin, may have additional thoughts as well about how to navigate the geopolitical landscape when it comes to AI.
I think, Nick, I'll be very brief, because I think you were probably right talking to Calvin initially, and I know Maria, I'm going to put her on the spot, that she's come out of the public sector not so long ago. So I'll actually defer to them, but we, of course, are seeing a lot more conversation around what the concept of sovereignty means in a digital world. We're starting to learn and to refine the definitions around sovereignty. Sometimes sovereignty is outrageously inconvenient, particularly when scale and computing power and other things are involved. So I think this is an ongoing conversation, Nick, as to how countries manage their sovereignty well, and with partners and supply chain that they believe that they can risk assess appropriately. Having built my own businesses in the past in the sovereign space, I'm looking forward to seeing where this lands in 5 years and 10 years time. But as I said, I'll gladly defer to Kelvin and Maria about this issue.
Well, in the spirit of that ongoing conversation, let's bring in Calvin. You're in government. You're like, how are you thinking about kind of the geopolitical landscape and how that interacts with AI?
I think there's a few perspectives of things when we meddle with geopolitics. First, of course, for the interest of the country, we're looking at how can a technology potentially help to grow the economy and help to bring a better digital life to our citizens. So from that perspective, we embrace that kind of technology. But of course, there's a national security interest in some of this geopolitical topic. That's where actually when we deploy technology, it's not like those days we just deploy, because there's a lot of consequences in play. Availability of the technology, the manpower, the capacity building strength of this technology, and how far this technology can bring us. That will it cause disinformation? Will it cause a national security issue? So this, we have to involve a whole ecosystem of people looking from sociology to politics into this play to understand what is the consequences of technology now. And from the angle, at least, that's where the first step, being there's a geopolitical, yes, let's manage it part by part, whereby actually that's where we can seek a balance of how do we still have a balance of guarding certain interests and yet able to enjoy the technology in a balanced environment. It's not an easy topic, definitely, but I have seen that actually countries are more forward-looking into looking at a bigger picture and understand which part to talk about it, which part we do not want to talk about it, so that actually things can move on and we can progress with the common interests of things. Yeah. So these are the kind of ground that we talk about. Yeah.
So
yes,
I'll add a little bit more to that. Since Scott was happy to drop me in it, I won't pretend to have all the answers for this at all. Like, as I said before, it is not easy at all. This is, and I think what's also important is that the private sector understand that it's not easy for regulators, and regulators understand that it's not easy for the private sector. So I think everyone understanding the complexities that we're all dealing with is the first part of getting this right, and just being really frank and honest with each other about how, what are we all trying to achieve here? What are the problems that we're trying to solve? The private sector cares just as much about the problems that the government is trying to solve, such as driving innovation and avoiding the risks. And so how do we make sure that we work together on solving them in more effective ways? Some of the ways of doing that include, some people call them public-private partnerships, but basically collaboration. As Scott was saying, we've never seen as much collaboration as we're seeing these days. And it's increasingly important because no one actually owns all the risk, and no one has the ability to address any particular risk fully. And so we just have to acknowledge that in this incredibly complex society that we live in, it is about shared risk and it is about shared accountability. And that means that we've just got to, take off all the pretense and work much more together. The insurers also play a really important role, because insurers have this ability to be able to look across and see the consequences of poor decision making and how that actually plays out in incidents across industry. So there's lots of different pieces of the puzzle, lots of different perspectives, and bringing them together is really good. A good example of this is the Fintel Alliance that Austrac here in Australia set up a few years ago, where it's a combination of getting the right people in the room to understand, what are the risks, what's going on, and how do we address them? And they look at financial intelligence, but also looking at technological advances and how do we share the problems that we're trying to solve. Many years ago, we used to say that, in order to be able to address these risks, everyone had to share all their information with everyone else. We've moved well beyond that. And we're now at a situation where we can actually much more effectively share solutions and disaggregate the way that we approach these risks. So it's not simple, and we're still learning as we go.
Jennnifer, I think oh yes.
Oh, sorry, Nick. I'd love to just jump in, if I may, for 1 second. I know you're going to jump to Jennnifer, but I'd really love to accentuate something that was underpinning what Calvin and Maria said, which was about people. We're here to talk about generative AI, and the assumption is that this thing is going to transform our lives magically or destroy our lives magically. It's not going to do either. What we're talking here about how a new technology like the internet or like cloud computing is going to change people's behavior and enable them in a number of fashions. So I think I'd love a call out to everyone to take away from this that the largest investment that we're seeing and being really well utilized around AI in a safe and secure manner is an investment into people. I still do talk to a lot of clients who are very focused upon the technology. And unfortunately, I see us falling into the same trap where people are going to become trapped around particular large language models by the decisions. But to me, the greatest investment should be in our own people, whether that's within a bank, within a government agency, within a giant company like Accenture, or within a community. So, our goal here is to educate people about the risks and opportunities for generative AI so that they are thoroughly prepared to use this and adapt it as the world changes. So I love that this conversation is about people at the end of the day. Sorry, Jennnifer, I cut you off.
No problem.
No,
and I'm sorry I'm blurry at the moment. I'm not trying to go incognito or anything.
You're being extra secure is what.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I do. But actually, I'm happy for you to wait so that. But I did have an audience question come in. They might be able to help with. The audience member is asking, when generative AI came into the picture, was it the case that business leaders, particularly those not involved in security, not involved in those responsibilities, maybe were more inclined towards talking about benefits? And now that they're seeing the potential threats, they're getting caught off guard, and now they've pivoted back to talking about resilience. Is that a pattern that you've seen in talking to clients about risk management? And one thing I add to this question is, particularly in sectors that aren't tech, that aren't heavily regulated like finance, that aren't strategic and have the geopolitical interest in them. If you're just like a normal company that just does business, how how do you talk to them about cybersecurity, and how are they kind of moving back and forth between benefits to resilience and kind of swinging back and forth on this pendulum?
So yeah, I mean, I think the point was made earlier that insurers, we are generally, when you're working in insurance and you're working in risk, you are constantly seeing the worst case scenarios manifest. So we are generally pessimists by nature, and so we're not trying to stop that innovation or stop that the acceleration of developments, but we are there to, I suppose, justify and foster the guardrails so that we are moving forward in a safe and secure manner. And so what we're seeing with our clients, just taking the ones that are not in a heavily regulated industry, that may be, perhaps you could say a little bit less sophisticated. With Gen AI, I mean, all of these buzzwords are, the leaders are confronting them, but I think it's what's making them jolt up is that they need to get their basics right. So they're needing to get, really basic cyber hygiene right. So I guess if I could use an analogy, you could have these, machine learning, AI, sophisticated cameras on your house, but if you're not using, basic front door locks, like what are the point of these very fancy cameras? So they understand that the risks facing them are very sophisticated. They need to get their basics right, and they need to invest where perhaps there was minimal investment before because they weren't in a regulated industry. And so the call for investments into their IT staffing, their IT security staffing, is there's a huge push for that. So it makes the conversations for IT teams a lot, well, not a lot easier, but a little bit easier. Yeah, full respect for IT teams that are, you know, they're meant to do world's work on like budgets of a shoestring. So, yeah.
I'd like to bring in Maria for my next question. You know, for most of the day, we've talked about, you know, risks, but we haven't talked a lot about opportunities that AI might present to cybersecurity. And I know you've written about this, and so I wanted to ask, how does AI and generative AI, you know, help cybersecurity teams do their job better? What are some ways that AI can help with cybersecurity as opposed to posing a cyber threat?
Absolutely. So I think, you know, this is really important for an organization like ours. We have more than 10 billion data events coming into our SOC every day. And so obviously with that volume of data, we can't have human beings there looking at every single thing. So around 35% of our incident response has already been automated thanks to machine learning and AI. And I think there's opportunities across the whole life cycle for cybersecurity, both in terms of what a SOC might do, but also much more broadly around what we do in setting policy, the way that we communicate and, you know, share information, automatically generating that, for example, or, you know, even tailored phishing exercises internal to the organization, etc. There are many, many ways that we can use AI. And I think it's just important that we remain creative and open in the way that we think about this. But at the same time, we've got to be absolutely sure that we do them well, that we make sure that we maximize the value, minimize the risks. And the risks are not just about security risks, though, of course, that is a really important thing for us to make sure that we do. There's also risks around fairness and you know, making sure that the design is effective and making sure that things can scale and all sorts of different things that we need to make sure that we focus on. In terms of Gen AI specifically, I mean, the answer to the question there around testing of software, that's definitely something that is of real interest for me around how do we use Gen AI for improving the way that we do things, how do we increase our productivity, because I think there's enormous potential there for freeing up our staff from doing the sort of mundane, more tactical work to doing much more creative and strategic pieces of work.
Nick, could I follow on from Maria there? You know, I had the privilege of, you know, helping set up Accenture's generative AI security program. And, you know, when you've got 22,000 security people inside your organization, there's kind of a challenge to do something that is worthwhile and at scale. So we took a triangulated approach of working with our big infrastructure partners like Google and Microsoft and AWS, some of our big security partners like Cloudflare and Palo Alto Networks and Security.ai, and triangulated them with some big clients and assumed that if our infrastructure partners, our security partners and clients had the same systemic problems or issues or challenges or opportunities in security, and we were observing the same thing, it was pretty good assumption that walking down that track and building a new use case or capability was worthwhile. And we kind of put that into three buckets that we thought generative AI added a new dimension in its ability to automate and orchestrate and do all the fun things that we talk about. Number one, it was relatively good at overcoming a siloed approach and a lack of understanding in data when it comes to threat intelligence. So big T, it's been really helpful about working through really, really large, multifaceted data sets and data lakes about understanding what intelligence actually means in the threat landscape. Number two, certainly, as Maria mentioned, the amount of work that you can get through or toil, the ability to automate these tasks that are repeatedly, that can be standardized and repeated, very key. But number three, coming back to the people aspect, and the third T, talent. It's been a wonderful augmentation tool around taking people from various skill sets and backgrounds, and giving them augmentation around understanding security, understanding risk, but also to give them significantly more experience that they've had in the past. So we really focused on that triangulation: partners, clients, and then using those 3 T's to transform the security capabilities that we can offer out to the world or that we deploy ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Calvin, I got a question for you now. So not every AI program works out. I think we're starting to see some companies scale back their AI ambitions after they realize it'll be more costly, more expensive, maybe not as ambitious as they otherwise would have hoped. But then what do you do? What do you do? What should a company do when they're trying to wind down an AI service that they've tested and they have all this data? Like, what's the data cleanup process? What should that be like from your perspective?
So actually, we have mentioned that from CSA angle, we equip companies how to securely deploy an AI system and how to close off an AI system. So some of this detail you can refer to our website. One of the key things is that we want to understand that actually, where does your crown jewel? Is your data set still holding the model? After you training the model, typically you use the data set to keep training the model. And of course, to date, you have not heard of anything, people doing RE on the model, embedded model to actually retrieve the data. But is the way you train the model gathering all these data points, and typically it's unencrypted. So all these data, how do you transfer in? So watch back the process of making sure all these data are cleaned up properly. And if you are unencrypted, how serious is your data? What sort of classification? And you may have to do a few times of erase or even take back the hard disk if you are so fearful that people can take in from the memory cells. So there's different proceeding to see how you should clean up this data. And actually, first, you don't just think that actually you're just putting your data in a black box and then you don't know what is it. And hopefully the black box will solve everything and clean your data up. No, there's no such things. You need to wash your data piece. Yeah. So these are some of the things that we have delivered some of these guiding principles in our website to guide people how to develop AI safely. Two is how you engage AI model, use it effectively. And third way is some of the governance perspective of transparency, explainability. These are some of the things that we want people to understand AI. So based on just now, some of the topic we're talking about is that actually from the Singapore government level, we are quite proactive in looking at what are the kind of systems that just now you have mentioned. They may not be a typical highly regulated system. They may not be in the tech industry, but they use AI. But sometimes they do not know that using AI may have some consequences. Is it a safety consequences or is it it can be no consequences? But we try to pick up those industries. There's some safety concern. If there's some safety concerns, then human life may be on the plate. So that's where we would really encourage them to engage them to say, hey, you need to train your people. You need to train your board, your developer to understand, is there such consequences or not? So we are actively trying to narrow down some of these systems that may have such kind of implication and consequences. Then actually we want to go upstream and talk to the people, the enterprises, the kind of people in the public market to understand, to make them understand what's kind of risk they're going to. Yeah. But of course, they need to realize the opportunity of using that tools too. Yeah, thanks.
So I started this conversation by asking about novel risks. And I want to end our conversation by talking about novel uses of generative AI, not necessarily for cybersecurity, just like a use of generative AI that you personally think is really cool. And I kind of want to get through all of us very quickly to kind of close off this conversation. Maybe I'll start with Jennnifer. What's a really kind of cool use of generative AI that you've seen that you're really excited about?
I would say how a lot of our clients are using it, and they are very excited. So that makes me very excited. It's the threat hunting, like the way that they can use these cybersecurity tools that simulate a threat actor. So like adaptive threat hunting, that is a very cool new development that we're seeing as a use case for generative AI.
What about you, Maria? What's a cool use of generative AI that's getting you really excited, as opposed to a threat that's worrying you?
Oh, look, how long have you got? I think there are so many opportunities, and I think we've already touched on some of them today around how do we increase the productivity of our software engineers, for example. It's incredibly useful. There's so many things that we could do. The targeted phishing for internal training and resilience, I think, is actually something I'm kind of keen on at the moment. But then there's the simple things that you might want to do in your own life, just like simple, cool things like generating a Christmas message in the voice of Gandalf or something silly like that, which is just cool and fun.
Calvin, what's a cool use of generative AI that you're very excited about?
I think I was supporting the healthcare industry. I think the cool thing about it is that next time when you go and see a doctor, actually the doctor is AI capturing all the information that you have described to the doctor about your backache and everything, and even a nice message about how's your day. And they are able to decipher and understand what is your problem and prescribe what is the things need to be done by the doctor in terms of the prescription and medicine. That's wow. It's cool, short, fast, and pretty accurate. But I think it needs the doctor to get adjusted to this sort of AI assisted kind of triage.
Scott, last word to you. What's a cool use of generative AI that you're very excited about?
Nick, I'm enamored with people who can think things or do things that I can't. So watching some of our colleagues around the world and the clients I get to work with and the regulators and government agencies we get to work with, resolving some systemic issues for making the world a better place. So watching shipping routes become more efficient so that there is less risk on the waters, but simultaneously affecting, some key variables for climate change. That's a really good side effect, and I think we'll see more of that. Drug discovery that makes people's lives better. So I think it's the really big philosophical things that get me most excited. But at a personal level, it's my wife's birthday next week. She wanted to go for a quiet lunch in a nice place, so I'm taking her for a hike in the mountains instead. And I've used generative AI to give me a climbing route that I would never thought of. So, mate, I'm hoping that, at a personal level, it's simply as something as simple as putting a smile on my wife's face.
So thank you all so much, Scott, Jennnifer, Maria, Calvin, for joining us to share your insights. We really appreciate it. And again, a big thanks to Accenture for partnering with us for this event today. Brainstorm AI will be held from July 30th and 31st in Singapore, and also December 9th and 10th in San Francisco. If you want to submit your interest to attend, please visit the links in the chat for each event. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you all have a pleasant rest of your day.